She was being traded for a barrel of oil, so I tossed my rifle and said, "Take me instead." The sun hung like a copper penny above Dead Horse Creek, the air shimmering with brain-cooking heat. I'd been riding hard for 3 days through God-forsaken country, and my horse was as done in as I was, but I couldn't stop, not when I knew what lay ahead. My name's Cole Brennan, and I used to be a Texas Ranger before the world went sideways. These days, I hunted bounties and tried to stay ahead of my ghosts. The letter that brought me here had been brief. Just a few lines in a woman's hand saying Sarah McKinnon was in trouble. It was signed M, and I didn't need more than that initial. Sarah McKinnon. The name still hit me like a punch to the gut, even after all these years. I'd known Sarah in Laredo before the war changed everything. She'd been the schoolmarm's daughter, with hair like spun gold and cornflower eyes. We'd been sweet on each other before the Rangers called, and I'd ridden off thinking I'd return a hero and claim her hand. Instead, I came back to find her married to Duncan McKinnon, a cattle baron with more money than sense, and a reputation for getting what he wanted, one way or another. Sarah had written me one letter after that, explaining that her father had debts and McKinnon had offered to clear them in exchange for her hand. She'd done what she thought was right, but the words between the lines told a different story. That was 5 years ago. I'd tried to forget her, tried to move on, but some wounds just won't heal clean. Now, as I crested the ridge overlooking Black Mesa, I could see why someone might trade a woman for oil. The town was dying, half the buildings stood empty, windows like dead eyes staring at nothing. The few folks moving about looked dried up as the creek bed. But oil changed everything in Texas. Black gold could turn a ghost town into a boom town overnight, and there'd been a significant strike north of here, the kind that made men do desperate things. I found McKinnon's spread 2 miles outside town. The ranch house that had once been white was now dust-colored, and the corrals were mostly empty. A few scrawny cattle wandered the overgrazed pastures. As I rode up, a man stepped onto the porch. He wasn't McKinnon. This fellow was shorter, thicker, with pale skin that suggested indoor living. He wore a faded suit and a bowler hat completely out of place in cow country. "You must be Brennan," he said with a slight accent. "I'm Edgar Sutton. Mrs. McKinnon said you might come." I dismounted slowly, keeping my hands visible. This Sutton had the look of someone who'd seen violence. "Where's McKinnon?" "Inside. Drunk, mostly. Lost the last of his herd." Sutton smiled coldly. "Perhaps we should discuss business first. I don't have business with you." "Oh, but you do." He produced a folded paper. "McKinnon owes me considerable money, gambling debts, plus a loan to restock cattle. When a man can't pay," he shrugged, "alternative arrangements must be made." I didn't like where this was heading. "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind that involve Mrs. McKinnon and a gentleman from back east who's willing to pay handsomely for certain companionship. A barrel of oil, to be precise, enough to clear her husband's debts and leave a little extra besides." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd seen enough to know what Sutton meant, the kind of trade that happened in boomtowns, where women were scarce and men had more money than morals. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now. My employer is eager to conclude this transaction." Sutton's smile widened. Of course, if someone offered alternative payment, that's when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked older than her 26 years, worn by hardship. Her golden hair had darkened to honey brown, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but she was still beautiful. "Cole," she said, and her voice was exactly as I remembered it. "You shouldn't have come." "Couldn't stay away once I got word," I replied. "Not when you needed help. This isn't your fight." "Like hell it isn't." Sutton cleared his throat. "How touching. But sentiment doesn't pay debts, I'm afraid. Now if you'll excuse us, we have business to conclude." He gestured toward the road, where dust announced approaching riders. 4 men on horseback, with a pack mule trailing. The lead rider was a big man in expensive clothes, an Eastern dandy who thought money could buy anything. "Ah, Mr. Blackwood," Sutton called. "Right on time." Blackwood dismounted and looked Sarah over like livestock at auction. "She'll do," he said finally, "though she's not as young as I expected." "Age brings experience," Sutton replied smoothly. I'd heard enough. My hand moved to my gun, but Sutton was faster. His pistol appeared with practiced ease. "I wouldn't if I were you," he said calmly. "My associates are quite skilled, and Mrs. McKinnon might get hurt in the crossfire." He was right. Blackwood's men had spread out in a semicircle, their hands near their weapons. I was outnumbered and outgunned, but that didn't mean I was out of options. "What's the debt?" I asked. $2,000, Sutton replied, plus interest. "Call it 2,500, all told." It was more money than I had, but not by much. The problem was, my money was in a bank in Austin, 3 days' ride away. "I can get the money," I said. "Give me a week. I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood can't wait that long. He has other business to attend to." Sutton's finger tightened on his trigger. "Now if you'll step aside." That's when inspiration struck. I looked at the pack mule behind Blackwood's men and saw the barrel strapped to its back. Oil was valuable, sure, but it wasn't the only thing men would pay for in these parts. "What if I offered you something better than the woman?" I asked. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Me." The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Sarah gasped, and even Sutton looked surprised. "Explain," Blackwood said. "You want someone to take back east with you, right? Someone to keep you company?" I let my meaning sink in. "Well, I'm worth more than she is. I'm a former Texas Ranger with a price on my head in 3 states. There are folks who'd pay good money to get their hands on me." It was a gamble, but I'd learned that Eastern dandies like Blackwood often had twisted notions about frontier justice and the value of notorious men. "Interesting," Blackwood mused. "But how do I know you're telling the truth?" I reached slowly into my vest and pulled out a wanted poster I'd been carrying. It was old and creased, but it clearly showed my face and offered a $500 reward for my capture, dead or alive. "500's not enough to cover the debt," Sutton pointed out. "That's just one bounty," I said. "I've got warrants in Arkansas and New Mexico too. Add them up and you're looking at close to $1,500. Plus, a man like me knows things where certain outlaws might be hiding, which banks are easy targets, which lawmen can be bought. That kind of information is worth more than money to the right people." Blackwood was clearly intrigued. He walked over and examined the poster, then looked me up and down like he was appraising a horse. "It's an interesting proposition," he admitted, "but how do I know you won't try to escape? Because if I do, you still have her, and if anything happens to me, word will get out about what kind of business you're really in. Men like you depend on reputation, and there are some reputations that can't be bought back." It was a bluff, but Blackwood didn't know that. He glanced at Sutton, who shrugged. "The choice is yours, Mr. Blackwood, though I should point out that a live man is considerably more trouble than a compliant woman." "True," Blackwood said, "but also potentially more profitable." The silence stretched out like a taut rope. I could hear Sarah's breathing, quick and shallow, and the distant sound of a hawk circling overhead. My life hung in the balance, but all I could think about was getting her out of this mess. Finally, Blackwood nodded. "Very well, I accept your offer." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by the cold realization of what I'd just done. I was trading my freedom, possibly my life, for Sarah's safety, but seeing the grateful tears in her eyes, I knew it was worth it. "Wait," Sutton interjected. "The debt still needs to be settled. A promise of future bounties doesn't pay present bills." "The barrel of oil you brought covers the debt," I said. "That was the original deal, but now we're making a different deal," Blackwood said smoothly, "one that requires additional insurance." He gestured to his men, and one of them produced a set of shackles. My heart sank as I realized I'd been outmaneuvered. "You see, Mr. Brennan, I've heard of you. You're quite famous in certain circles, not just for your bounties but for your habit of escaping from impossible situations. These gentlemen behind me are bounty hunters themselves, and they've been tracking you for some time." I looked at the men more closely and recognized one of them, Jake Morrison, a tracker with a reputation for never losing a trail. My stomach dropped as I realized this had all been a setup. "Sarah never sent that letter, did she?" I asked. "I'm afraid not," Sutton said, "though she did mention your name when her husband first got into debt. It gave us the idea to use you to solve 2 problems at once." "You son of a," Morrison's rifle butt caught me behind the ear before I could finish the curse. Stars exploded across my vision, and I dropped to my knees in the dust. "Cole," Sarah started toward me, but Sutton caught her arm. Now, Mrs. McKinnon, our business is concluded. Your husband's debts are paid, and you're free to go." He paused. "Of course, if word of this arrangement were to reach certain authorities, it might go poorly for everyone involved." The threat was clear. Sarah looked at me with anguished eyes, but I managed to nod at her. She needed to stay quiet and stay safe. That's all that mattered now. As the shackles closed around my wrists, I heard her whisper, "I'm sorry, Cole. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, though my head was spinning. "You're worth it." Blackwood's men hauled me to my feet and toward their horses. As they did, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A brand burned into the side of the pack mule. It was the mark of the Comancheros, the outlaw traders who dealt in guns, whiskey, and human flesh along the Mexican border. I wasn't being taken back east to be turned in for bounty money. I was being sold into a slavery that would make Sarah's fate look merciful by comparison. But knowing that didn't change anything, I'd made my choice, and I'd make it again. As they threw me over a horse and tied me down, I looked back at Sarah one last time. She was standing on the porch of that broken-down ranch house,
tears streaming down her face, but she was free. That had to be enough. The sun was setting as we rode out, painting the sky the color of blood. Behind us, Black Mesa faded into the gathering darkness, and ahead lay an uncertain future. But I'd learned long ago that sometimes a man's worth isn't measured by what he gains, but by what he's willing to lose, and I'd lost everything to save the woman I loved. The desert stretched out before us, vast and unforgiving, full of dangers that made Blackwood and his men look like choir boys. Somewhere out there were Apache warriors who took scalps for sport, rattlesnakes that could kill a man in minutes, and 1,000 ways to die under the merciless sun, but I'd faced worse odds before and lived to tell about it. And if there was one thing Cole Brennan was good at, it was surviving long enough to turn the tables on his enemies. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. As the first stars appeared overhead, I began planning my escape. It would be dangerous, maybe impossible, but that had never stopped me before, and when I was free again, and I would be free, I'd come back for the men who'd done this. They'd learn what it meant to cross a Texas Ranger, even a former one with a price on his head. The desert night was cold and full of mysteries, but I wasn't afraid. I'd traded my rifle for Sarah's freedom, and it was a bargain I'd make every time. Some things were worth any price, even your life. Chapter 2, The Devil's Bargain. We rode through the night toward the border country where law was suggestion, not reality. My hands had gone numb from the shackles, and every step sent pain through my skull where Morrison had clubbed me. But I stayed alert, watching for opportunities. Blackwood rode beside me, occasionally glancing over with satisfaction. Morrison and his partner, a scarred half-breed called Vasco, flanked us, while the fourth man, Peters, brought up the rear with pack animals. "You're probably wondering where we're taking you," Blackwood said as we crested a ridge. "I imagine you're cooking up some escape plan." I didn't respond. Men like you are worth more than bounty money to the right buyers. Mining operations in Sonora pay top dollar for experienced hands who won't ask questions. Course, they don't care whether those hands are willing. Silver mines. I'd heard stories about operations south of the border, places where men went in and never came out, where overseers worked prisoners to death extracting ore for companies that didn't officially exist. Of course there is another option, he continued. I have associates in New Orleans who specialize in a different kind of trade, fighting rings mostly. Wealthy gentlemen who enjoy watching desperate men beat each other bloody for their entertainment. A man with your reputation could last quite a while in such an environment, assuming he had the proper motivation. What kind of motivation? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Why, Mrs. McKinnon, of course. My arrangement with Sutton allows for certain contingencies. If you prove troublesome during transport, or if you fail to cooperate with your new employers, well, let's just say the lady's freedom could be revoked. The bastard had thought of everything. Even if I escaped, Sarah would pay the price. But I'd been in tight spots before, and there was always an angle if you looked hard enough. As we descended into the wash, Morrison kept glancing back toward the ridge. His hand rested on his rifle, tension in his shoulders. Expecting company? I asked. Morrison's eyes flicked to Blackwood, who frowned. What is it, Jake? Been seeing dust for the past hour, Morrison replied. Could be nothing, but you don't think it's nothing, Blackwood finished. How many riders? Hard to say. At least 4, maybe more. Vasco spat into the dust. Could be Apaches. This is Victorio's country. The mention of the Apache war chief sent a chill through the group. Victorio had been raiding for months, known for his creativity with captives. Or it could be McKinnon, I suggested. Man might have sobered up enough to realize his wife's been sold. McKinnon's a drunk and a coward, Blackwood said dismissively. He wouldn't follow us into this country, but his confidence seemed forced, and I caught him glancing back toward the ridge as well. Whatever was following us, it had everyone on edge. We rode in silence for another hour, winding through arroyos and rock formations that looked like ancient ruins in moonlight. The air was getting colder, and I could smell rain coming. That's when we heard the first shot. It came from behind us, a sharp crack echoing off canyon walls. Morrison immediately wheeled his horse around, rifle ready, while Vasco grabbed my mount's lead rope. Stay with the prisoner, Blackwood ordered, drawing his own weapon. Peters, you're with me and Morrison. As the 3 men rode back toward the sound of gunfire, Vasco and I were left alone in the narrow canyon. He was a dangerous man. I could see it in the way he sat his horse, and the casual way he held his gun, but he was also outnumbered by whatever was coming up behind us. You know, I said conversationally, if that's Apache back there, they'll kill you just as quick as they'll kill me. Might be we should work together on this. Vasco smiled, revealing teeth filed to points in the Apache fashion. I am not afraid of my brothers. Your brothers, you're Apache. Half. My mother was Kurikawa. My father was a buffalo soldier who thought he could tame her. His smile widened. He was wrong. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the sound of horses moving fast. Vasco's head snapped around, and for just a moment, his attention wavered. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I threw myself sideways off my horse, rolling as I hit the ground. The shackles made it awkward, but I managed to get behind a boulder before Vasco could bring his rifle to bear. "You cannot run far with those chains, Brennan," he called out, "and there is nowhere to go." He was right about the chains, but wrong about having nowhere to go. I'd noticed something during our descent into the canyon, a narrow crack in the rock wall that looked like it might lead to a way out. If I could reach it. More gunfire erupted from the direction Blackwood had gone, and this time I heard men shouting. One voice stood out above the rest, bellowing orders in a familiar tone. Duncan McKinnon, the son of a bitch, had followed us after all. Maybe there was more steel in Sarah's husband than anyone had given him credit for. Vasco was distracted by the battle behind us, trying to figure out what was happening while keeping an eye on me. I used his divided attention to work my way closer to the crack in the canyon wall. The shackles were a problem, but they weren't as secure as they could have been. Morrison had been in a hurry, and the lock was an old one. I'd picked better locks with less to work with. I found a sharp piece of rock and began working at the mechanism, using techniques I'd learned from a safecracker named Jimmy the Fish back in my ranger days. It was delicate work, made harder by the poor light and the sounds of battle getting closer. "Brennan," Vasco's voice was sharp with alarm. "Where are you?" I stayed quiet, continuing to work on the lock. The metal was old and worn, and I could feel it starting to give way. Then I heard hoofbeats approaching fast, and McKinnon's voice shouting, "Sarah, where's my wife? She's safe," I called out just as the lock finally gave way. The shackles fell to the ground with a metallic clatter. Vasco spun toward the sound, but it was too late. I was already moving, diving through the crack in the canyon wall just as his rifle shot chipped rock where my head had been. The passage was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways, but it led upward, and after 20 feet of climbing I emerged onto a ledge that gave me a clear view of the canyon below. What I saw surprised me. McKinnon had brought more than just his ranch hands. There were at least a dozen men with him, and they were armed with military rifles. As I watched, they systematically surrounded Blackwood's remaining men. The fight was over quickly. Blackwood himself was on the ground, clutching a wounded arm, while Peters lay motionless beside his horse. Morrison had his hands up, but his eyes were scanning the canyon walls, looking for escape routes. Vasco had disappeared, which didn't surprise me. Apache could vanish into country like this without leaving so much as a footprint. "Where's Brennan?" McKinnon demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Gone," Morrison replied. "Slipped his chains during the fighting." McKinnon cursed and began organizing his men to search the area. But I had other plans. From my vantage point, I could see a path that led up and out of the canyon system entirely. With luck, I could be miles away before they even knew which direction I'd gone. But first I had unfinished business. I worked my way around the canyon rim until I was directly above where McKinnon had gathered his prisoners. The drop was about 30 feet, manageable if you knew how to land right. "McKinnon," I called out. Every head turned upward, and I saw guns swinging in my direction. But I was already moving, dropping down to a narrow shelf about halfway down the canyon wall. "Easy," I said, keeping my hands visible. "I'm not armed." "Cole?" McKinnon stepped forward, his weathered face showing confusion. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Your wife sent for me," I lied smoothly. "Said you were in trouble." It was close enough to the truth, and McKinnon seemed to accept it. His shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked older than his 50-odd years. "She shouldn't have involved you in this mess," he said. "This is my fault, all of it. What matters now is that she's safe," I replied. "But we need to make sure it stays that way." I dropped down to the canyon floor, noting that McKinnon's men had lowered their weapons. Up close I could see they weren't ranch hands at all. They were soldiers, or former soldiers, judging by the way they carried themselves. "Who are your friends?" I asked. "Buffalo soldiers from Fort Davis," McKinnon replied. "Sergeant Washington and his boys were mustered out last month, and they owed me a favor from the Apache troubles 2 years back." That explained the military precision of their attack. It also explained why Vasco had vanished so quickly. He'd recognized his former enemies and decided discretion was the better part of valor. "What's the plan now?" I asked. McKinnon looked at his prisoners, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. "That depends on what these bastards were planning to do with you." I filled him in on Blackwood's arrangement with the Comancheros and the mining operations in Sonora. By the time I finished, McKinnon's face was dark with rage. "Silver mines," he spat. "Might as well have put a bullet in your head and been done with it." The thought occurred to me, I said dryly. "Question is, what do we do about it?" Sergeant Washington, a tall black man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, stepped forward. "If I might suggest, sir, these men are clearly part of a larger criminal enterprise. The territorial authorities would be very interested in their activities." "Authorities are 3 days' ride from here," McKinnon pointed out, "and Sutton's still back at my ranch with Sarah." That was the crux of the problem. We'd captured some of the players, but the main threat was still in place, and Sarah was still in danger. "Actually," Blackwood spoke up from where he sat nursing his wounded arm, "you might want to reconsider your position, Mr. McKinnon." "How's that?" McKinnon asked. "Because Mr. Sutton isn't just a debt collector. He represents certain interests in Washington, interests that wouldn't look kindly on interference with their operations." "What kind of interests?" Sergeant Washington asked, his voice sharp. Blackwood smiled despite his pain. The kind that can make a man's military pension disappear. The kind that can ensure charges are brought against former rangers who've bent a few laws in their time. His eyes fixed on me. The kind that can make sure a woman like Mrs. McKinnon finds herself facing charges for aiding and abetting known criminals. The son of a bitch was threatening Sarah again, even from a position of weakness. But there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't bluffing about the political connections. "You're saying Sutton's got federal backing?" I asked. "I'm saying Mr. Sutton has friends in very high places. Friends who don't appreciate their business arrangements being disrupted by local law enforcement." McKinnon's face went pale. "What business arrangements?" "Oil, Mr. McKinnon. Your land sits on top of one of the richest deposits in Texas. Mr. Sutton's employers have been very patient, waiting for you to default on your loans so they could acquire your property legally. But patience has its limits. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about McKinnon's gambling debts or Sarah's safety. This was about oil rights and the kind of money that could buy senators and judges. So what you're telling me," I said slowly, "is that if we don't play along, Sarah gets charged as an accessory to whatever crimes I'm supposedly guilty of. McKinnon loses his land anyway, and we all end up in federal prison. Or worse," Blackwood confirmed. "Accidents happen to people who interfere with important business interests." Sergeant Washington exchanged glances with his men. They were soldiers, used to following orders and respecting authority. The idea of going up against federal agents clearly made them uncomfortable. But McKinnon surprised me. Instead of backing down, he straightened up and fixed Blackwood with a stare that could have melted steel. "Mister," he said quietly, "you just made a big mistake. How's that? You assumed I give a damn about my land, or my money, or anything else more than I care about my wife." McKinnon's voice was deadly calm. "You see, I know exactly what kind of man I am. I'm a drunk and a failure and a coward who let his wife get into this mess in the first place. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let her pay for my mistakes." He turned to Sergeant Washington. "How do you and your boys feel about taking on some powerful folks in Washington?" Washington was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. "Well, sir, we didn't much like the way they mustered us out anyway. Something about budget cuts. But we all knew it was really about not wanting too many colored soldiers around now that the Indian wars are winding down." "That settles it then," McKinnon said. "We're going to end this thing, one way or another." "You're making a mistake," Blackwood warned. "You have no idea what you're up against." "Maybe not," I said, stepping forward, "but we're about to find out." The plan we came up with was simple, which was usually best. We'd head back to McKinnon's ranch and confront Sutton directly. If he was bluffing about his federal connections, we'd call his bluff. If he wasn't, we'd deal with that when it came. But first we needed to handle our prisoners. Morrison and Blackwood weren't going anywhere in their condition, but leaving them wasn't an option. "Tie them up and leave them," Washington suggested. "We can send the territorial marshal back once this is settled." "Assuming we're alive to send anyone," McKinnon muttered. "We'll be alive," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Men like Sutton depend on fear and political pressure. Take that away, and they're just another brand of sidewinder." As we prepared to ride out, I found myself thinking about Sarah again. She'd been through hell these past few years, married to a man she didn't love to pay off her father's debts, watching her husband drink himself into ruin. Now she was caught in the middle of a power play that could destroy what little life she'd managed to build. But she was stronger than she knew. She'd had to be, to survive everything that had happened to her. And if we could end this thing tonight, maybe she'd finally have a chance at the life she deserved. The ride back to McKinnon's ranch took most of the night. We moved carefully, watching for sign of Vasco or other Apache, but the desert was quiet except for the whisper of wind through the sage. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, we could see smoke rising from the direction of the ranch. My heart sank thinking we might be too late, but as we got closer, I realized it was just cook smoke from the chimney. "Sutton's still here," McKinnon observed, along with his men. I counted at least 6 horses in the corral that hadn't been there before. Sutton had reinforcements, which meant this wasn't going to be as simple as we'd hoped. "How do you want to play this?" Washington asked. I studied the layout of the ranch buildings, looking for advantages. The house sat in the middle of an open yard, with the barn and outbuildings providing some cover. There were good fields of fire from the porch and windows, but also multiple approaches if you knew what you were doing. "We need to get Sarah out first," I said. "Everything else is secondary." McKinnon nodded. "There's a root cellar behind the house. If she's thinking clearly, that's where she'll go when the shooting starts." "You think there's going to be shooting?" Washington asked. "Count on it," I replied. "Men like Sutton don't give up easy, and they've got too much invested in this deal to walk away quiet." We spent another hour planning the approach, then spread out to surround the ranch. The sun was fully up now, painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. It was going to be a beautiful day to die if it came to that, but I was betting it wouldn't come to that. I was betting that for all his talk about federal connections and political power, Edgar Sutton was just another crook who'd bitten off more than he could chew. I was about to find out if that bet would pay off.